Section 1. The First Impression, Arriving in Muscat. The moment you step off the plane in Muscat, something feels immediately different from every other Gulf country you may have visited. There is no race to be the tallest, the flashiest, the most extreme. Oman does not compete with Dubai. It does not try to be Abu Dhabi. It simply is itself, and that confidence is the first thing that hits you. The airport is immaculate. Not in the clinical, sterile way of a German transit hub, but warm, lined with carved wooden screens, the subtle scent of oud drifting through the air conditioning, traditional Omani lanterns casting soft amber light across polished stone floors. Staff are unhurried. Customs officers greet you with genuine eye contact. There is no pushing, no noise, no sense of chaos. It feels, somehow, like arriving at someone's extremely wealthy home rather than an international airport. Driving into the city, the first thing you notice is that Muscat is not a vertical city. There are almost no skyscrapers. By law, no building in Muscat can be taller than a certain height. The government has explicitly decided to preserve the skyline so that the Hajar Mountains remain visible from anywhere in the capital. That is a decision that tells you something important about how Oman chooses to operate. Wealth here is not always about size. It is often about restraint. The roads are extraordinary. Wide, smooth, impeccably maintained, with highway landscaping that would embarrass many European capitals. Median strips are planted with flowering bougainvillea. Roundabouts, and Oman has famous roundabouts, are decorated with giant incense burners, forts, ships, and sculptures celebrating Omani heritage. In a country where the temperature regularly reaches 50 degrees Celsius in summer, they are still watering ornamental gardens along the highway at midnight. And the cars. The cars deserve their own mention. Oman has one of the highest rates of vehicle ownership per capita in the world. Pickup trucks with spotless chrome bumpers, Land Cruisers that have never seen a scratch, the occasional Ferrari parked outside a fish market as though this is perfectly normal. Because here, it kind of is. Section 2. The money. Where does it all come from? And where does it go? To understand life in Oman, you need to understand the money, where it comes from, and, more importantly, how it is distributed. Oman is an oil-producing nation, but it is not the richest oil producer in the Gulf. It does not have Saudi Arabia's reserves. It does not have Qatar's natural gas wealth. What it has, and what it has managed with unusual care, is enough. And the crucial difference between Oman and many other resource-rich nations is what it chose to do with that enough. For decades, Sultan Qaboos bin Said, who ruled from 1970 until his death in 2020, took a country that was, in 1970, one of the least developed places on Earth, with only 3 primary schools and 1 paved road outside the capital, and transformed it into a modern state with virtually universal healthcare, free education from kindergarten through university, and infrastructure that would be the envy of most of the developed world. This transformation, which Omanis simply call the Renaissance, happened in a single human lifetime. People who were born in mud brick houses with no electricity have lived to see their grandchildren studying medicine in air-conditioned universities funded entirely by the state. For Omani citizens, the social contract is extraordinary by global standards. Healthcare at government hospitals is either free or heavily subsidized. Education at every level, including postgraduate study, is heavily subsidized or fully funded. Citizens who work in the public sector, and a very significant proportion of Omanis do, receive salaries that are comfortable by regional standards, along with benefits, pensions, and job security that most private sector workers globally could only dream about. Land grants and housing loans at minimal interest rates have historically been available to citizens looking to build homes. None of this means Oman is a perfect place to live. The country has faced serious economic challenges, particularly as oil revenues have fluctuated and as the government has worked to reduce its dependence on hydrocarbons. Subsidies have been cut. A value-added tax was introduced in 2021, a significant shift in a region where taxation was virtually unheard of for citizens. The government has been pushing hard on what it calls Vision 2040, a plan to diversify the economy into tourism, logistics, manufacturing, and fisheries. The adjustments have been real, and some Omanis have felt them. But even with those shifts, the baseline quality of life for an Omani citizen is almost incomprehensible to someone from most of the world. What does it feel like to know that if you get sick, you will be treated? That your children will be educated? That you will not be bankrupted by a medical emergency or a job loss? For Omanis, that security is simply the water they swim in. For a visitor from almost anywhere else on Earth, it is startling. Section 3. The people who actually lives here. Here is something that surprises almost every first-time visitor to Oman. Omani citizens are actually a minority in their own country. Roughly 45% of the people living in Oman at any given time are expatriate workers, people from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, the Philippines, Egypt, and dozens of other countries who have come to Oman to work. They drive the taxis, build the roads, staff the hotels, operate the shops, work in the hospitals as nurses and technicians, and provide the labor that keeps the country functioning day to day. This creates a layered social reality that is impossible to ignore once you are aware of it. There are effectively two parallel worlds existing in the same space. The Omani citizen world, with its social protections and its cultural continuity and its sense of ownership over the land and its future. And the expatriate world, which is far more precarious, tied to employment, subject to deportation, without access to citizenship regardless of how long a person has lived there or how much they have contributed. The treatment of migrant workers in Oman, as in most Gulf countries, is a subject that requires honest discussion. The kafala system, a sponsorship arrangement that ties a worker's legal status directly to their employer, has historically given employers significant power over workers' lives. Workers have at times found themselves unable to change jobs, unable to leave the country, and vulnerable to wage theft or poor working conditions. Oman has taken steps in recent years to reform aspects of this system, and conditions vary enormously depending on the employer and the sector. But the fundamental power imbalance is real, and any honest portrait of life in Oman has to acknowledge it. What is also true is that the relationship between Omanis and their expatriate communities is often genuinely warm on a human level. An Indian shopkeeper who has spent 30 years in Muscat knows the city better than most Omanis. A Filipino nurse who has worked in a Muscat hospital for 2 decades has formed deep bonds with patients and colleagues. The human connections that form across those structural inequalities are real and meaningful, even when the systems surrounding them are not fair. Omani culture itself is fascinating and distinctive, quite different from the Gulf state identities to the north. Omanis have historically been seafarers and traders, with deep connections to East Africa, the Indian subcontinent, and Southeast Asia. There are Omanis whose families have roots in Zanzibar, in Malabar, in Balochistan. The cuisine reflects this. Biryani sitting comfortably alongside shua, the slow-cooked spiced lamb that is the centerpiece of any major celebration, and halwa, the gelatinous saffron and cardamom sweet that is offered to every guest in every home as a matter of cultural obligation. Section 4. Daily life. What ordinary days actually look like. To understand what daily life in Oman actually feels like, you have to get away from the tourist brochure version and think about the rhythms of ordinary days. The working week in Oman runs Sunday through Thursday. Friday is the holy day, the day of congregational prayer, family gatherings, and a particular kind of afternoon stillness that settles over the cities. Friday lunch is sacred in Omani households. Families gather, enormous quantities of rice and meat are prepared, and the meal extends for hours. If you are ever invited to an Omani home for Friday lunch, you say yes. You say yes immediately. The heat shapes everything. In summer, outdoor life migrates almost entirely to the hours before 8 in the morning and after 8 at night. Shopping malls, and Oman has extraordinary shopping malls, become the social spaces of the afternoon. Families walk through air-conditioned corridors with children in strollers, teenagers in clusters, grandparents sharing a bench outside a coffee shop. The mall in Oman serves a social function that parks and public squares serve in cooler climates. Coffee culture is serious and specific. Omani coffee, kahwa, is not what most of the world means by coffee. It is light, almost golden, flavored with cardamom and sometimes rose water or saffron, served in tiny handleless cups that are refilled continuously until you signal that you have had enough by tilting the cup gently from side to side. It is served with dates, always, the combination of bitter and sweet being the point. Refusing kahwa in an Omani home is not really an option. It would be like refusing a handshake. The coffee is not the beverage, it is the welcome. The souks, the traditional markets, are still very much alive in Oman, even as modern retail expands. Souk Mutra in Muscat is one of the oldest continuously operating markets in the Arabian world, its narrow covered lanes winding through centuries of trade in frankincense, silver, textiles, spices, and antiques. The smell of frankincense, which Oman has been exporting to the rest of the world for literally 3,000 years, hits you before you even enter. Old Omani women in elaborately embroidered robes haggle with silver merchants who know their prices down to the last paisa. Young Omani men in immaculate white dishdashas browse antique khanjars, the curved ceremonial daggers that every Omani man wears to formal occasions and which are as much a cultural symbol as a piece of jewelry. Speaking of the dishdasha, the full-length white robe worn by Omani men, it is worth pausing on what it represents. In most countries, traditional dress has become something worn only for special occasions, if at all. In Oman, it is genuinely everyday clothing. Men wear dishdashas to the office, to the market, to the restaurant, to the gym, and to drive their Land Cruisers through the mountains at the weekend. It is practical, comfortable in the heat, and carries an enormous amount of cultural pride. The quality of a man's dishdasha, its whiteness, its fabric, the precision of its collar, communicates things that a suit might communicate in another context. An Omani man in a pristine, perfectly pressed dishdasha with a fine kama cap is making an aesthetic statement with absolute confidence. Section 5. The Hidden Oman. What the brochures miss here is what the travel industry consistently undersells about Oman. The country is geographically extraordinary in a way that makes almost no sense. Within the borders of a single country, you can find towering red sand dunes, deep green mountain plateaus with apple orchards and rose gardens, dramatic fjords carved into limestone that look like they belong in Scandinavia, and a southern region called Dhofar that receives its own monsoon, the Kharif, transforming from a brown desert landscape to something resembling the Irish countryside between June and September. Thousands of Omanis drive south every summer specifically to experience rain and green hills in a country that is otherwise defined by aridity and heat. The wadis, dry riverbeds that fill with astonishing rushing water after rain, cut through the Hajar Mountains like cracks in the earth, pooling in turquoise and green, and sometimes almost milky blue depending on the minerals in the rock. Swimming in a wadi pool surrounded by vertical cliff faces and date palms, with a village of stone houses visible on the ridge above, while a goat regards you with total indifference from a nearby rock. This is an experience that is available in Oman and almost nowhere else on Earth. And yet Oman receives a tiny fraction of the tourists that Dubai pulls in every year. This is partly by design. The government has been deliberate about developing tourism slowly, building lodges and infrastructure that fit the landscape rather than overwhelming it, and attracting visitors who want to experience the country rather than just the country's amenities. The result is that Oman still feels, in many of its most beautiful places, genuinely undiscovered. You can have a wadi entirely to yourself on a Tuesday. You can be the only non-Omani in a mountain village market. You can drive for an hour through spectacular desert scenery without passing a single billboard. There is also a hidden Oman, in the sense of a counterculture that exists quietly and without much fanfare. Oman is a conservative Muslim society, but it has historically been one of the more relaxed Gulf states when it comes to social expectations. Alcohol is sold in licensed hotels and restaurants and is accessible to non-Muslims and to Omanis who choose to drink in private. Music is a living tradition, with Omani folk music styles, some of them with clear African roots from the centuries of connection to Zanzibar, performed at weddings and festivals. Young Omanis listen to the same global music everyone else does, navigate social media, study abroad, and return home carrying ideas from different places that they are working out how to integrate with what they grew up with. Section 6. The tensions. The things Oman is quietly working through. No country portrait is honest without tension, and Oman has plenty of it. The generational shift is real and visible. The generation that grew up during the Renaissance, who remember what Oman was before 1970, who watched roads and hospitals appear in their lifetimes, who experienced the transformation of the country as a tangible daily reality, carries a particular reverence for what was built and a particular loyalty to the institutions that built it. The generation born into a modern Oman, who have grown up with smartphones and YouTube and university degrees and expectations formed partly by global media, is navigating something more complicated. They are the first generation that will not be able to rely as completely on government employment as their parents did. They are being asked to enter a private sector economy and compete in ways that feel unfamiliar after decades of a different social contract. The Omanization push, the policy of requiring companies to employ a certain percentage of Omani citizens, is part of the government's response to this. It has had mixed results. Some sectors have genuinely developed local talent. Others have struggled with a mismatch between the skills Omani graduates have and the skills that industries need. This is not a failure unique to Oman. It is the challenge of rapid economic development everywhere, but it is a real source of friction in a country where expectations have been high. The question of political participation is another quiet pressure point. Oman is an absolute monarchy. There is a consultative council, the Majlis al-Dawla, but its role is advisory rather than legislative in any meaningful sense. There are no political parties. Public dissent is managed carefully. The 2011 Arab Spring saw protests in Oman, which were notably smaller and less violent than those in neighboring countries, partly because Sultan Qaboos responded relatively quickly with economic concessions and job creation announcements. But the fundamental question of how political systems evolve in societies that are becoming more educated and more connected to global conversations about governance and rights is one that Oman is navigating with the rest of the Gulf, and it does not have a clear answer yet. What Oman does have, which many of its neighbors do not, is a reputation for genuine neutrality and thoughtful diplomacy. Oman has served as a quiet back channel between adversaries for decades, playing a role in facilitating communication between Iran and the West, between various warring parties in regional conflicts, between people who will not officially sit in the same room. This small, quiet, wealthy country has punched consistently above its weight in international diplomacy, and that reputation for trustworthiness is something its citizens carry with genuine pride. Section 7. Frankincense, the oldest wealth. Before oil, before gas, before the modern Gulf economy existed in any form, there was frankincense. Oman's southern region of Dhofar contains one of the only places on Earth where the Boswellia sacra tree, the source of frankincense resin, grows wild in quantity. For more than 3,000 years, Oman was the frankincense capital of the world. The ancient incense trade route that connected Oman to ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, ancient Mesopotamia, and ancient India was one of the most important economic arteries of the ancient world. Frankincense from Oman scented the temples of pharaohs, the funeral pyres of Roman emperors, and the religious ceremonies of a dozen civilizations simultaneously. Wandering through the ancient port of Sumhuram, now an archaeological site near the city of Salalah, you are standing in a place where merchants loaded ships with Omani frankincense 2,000 years ago for destinations across the ancient world. The ruins are modest, low stone walls in a river delta overlooking the sea, but the knowledge of what moved through this port transforms the landscape. This ordinary-looking coastline was once among the most commercially significant in the world. Frankincense is still harvested in Dhofar today, still sold in the souks, still burned in Omani homes as an everyday act of hospitality and spiritual practice. When an Omani family burns frankincense after a meal, waving the smoke through the house with a practiced gesture, they are doing something their ancestors have done for 3,000 years without interruption. There is no other luxury product on earth with that kind of continuous human story. And it comes from here, from this small, quiet, extraordinary country that most people cannot quite find on a map. Conclusion. Oman is not a perfect country. No country is. It has inequalities built into its social structure, political questions it has not yet resolved, economic pressures it is still working through, and a treatment of migrant workers that deserves ongoing scrutiny and reform. But it is also a country that took a genuinely extraordinary situation, the sudden acquisition of oil wealth, and chose to use it in a way that prioritized stability, education, health, infrastructure, and the protection of its own culture and landscape. It is a country that has been a reliable, thoughtful actor in a region that has seen enormous violence and instability. It is a country of breathtaking physical beauty that has deliberately chosen not to overwhelm that beauty with overdevelopment. And it is a country that burns frankincense in its homes the same way it has for 3,000 years, because some things are simply worth continuing. If you ever get the chance to go, go.